Good afternoon. We have been discussing English for work and studies. We have talked about English all over the world. It is a constant topic in our classes that we talk about why should we be learning English and what we're going to do with it. So you guys who are taking the pre-university English classes, you will definitely be using English in your studies at some point in your lives. I hope everyone is comfortable with their computers, that they have headphones. I'm not sure if someone has gone in there and set up the big screen. If not, you will be watching it in the small screens. But everybody should have this link open so they can type in chat, because I'll be asking questions throughout the process. What I'm using at home is the digital version of the book, so I don't have the numbers for the pages, but you can see behind me what the page looks like. So if you can find the page where it says My Story, English for Work and Studies. We have been talking about this for a while. We read the different texts about the different people and how they used English. They were all Norwegian students in different countries talking about English. We had an activity where different groups were together and one person from each group had to do a short presentation about this. I'm just refreshing our memory and going over these things so you know exactly where we're going to find ourselves soon. We have also done the understand section, where we were supposed to list who said this, who enjoyed this, who enjoyed that, who thinks this, who thinks that. We did the understand on that. So I want you to keep browsing through the pages so that you can find what we're going to read about next. The history of the English language. Has everyone found that? Just giving you time to browse through the pages until you can find it. The digital book says it's page 22, but I don't know if that's what it says on the paper version of it. So I'm going to give you the instructions to what you will do today. So you will read the background, the history of the English language, Shakespeare and the English language. So there are quite a bit of different expressions and new words that you should be able to learn from this, but by the same token, you are expected to know before you come to high school, because you are in high school. Videregående means high school, and högskola is college. Universitet is university, because a lot of people, when they say you're in high school, say, no, we're not in high school. but you are Videregående School means high school. So you're supposed to know not everything, but you were supposed to have an idea of who Shakespeare is and what are the different effects that he has had on the English language. But before we go into this, I want you to type in chat, when I say Shakespeare, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Even if somebody else has already typed in your answer, please type your answer anyway. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Shakespeare? You hear the name Shakespeare. A lot of people think Romeo and Juliet. Some people say Hamlet. Some people say Old English. Some people might think A Midsummer Night's Dream, or perhaps they just heard the name, but they don't know anything about it. Those of you who thought of Romeo and Juliet as soon as you heard the name Shakespeare, what do you know about that story? Please type. Please type in the chat. And even if you didn't write that when I asked what comes to mind when you think about Shakespeare, please go ahead and type in what you know about that story. In what ways, now the next question, in what ways is the story a tragedy? And in what ways is the story a romance? And can it be both? Please type your answers. It doesn't really matter if you perhaps see that somebody has typed something that you were going to say. I need to see everyone's answers. Otherwise, I can't mark you present in this class. So I don't know if you're watching me on the big screen or in the small screen, but I put a delay of 5 minutes at the beginning of this broadcast to make sure that you'd have time to prepare. So some people think that Romeo and Juliet is just a very romantic story, it's just a love story, because two people fall in love and they are willing to do anything to stay together. So they look at it as a romantic situation going on there. But some people think that was just a tragedy that didn't need to happen. What is your opinion about that? Please type in chat. When I teach these classes from home, I have 3 different things that I have to do, and I pretty much teach the class 3 times. I teach it when I'm preparing. I teach it again when I have to watch the entire video to read the chat box and see who participated. And then again, when I correct the work that people do based on the class, just so people know. So in what ways is it tragic? In what ways is it romantic? Different people have different opinions about polar opposites like this, like a tragedy and a romance. But one of the things that you should remember when it comes to Shakespeare, and the reason why he's so iconic, is that his stories continue to be told even many, 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 many years after he was gone. How many of you have watched one of the movies based on Romeo and Juliet? There are several versions of the movie, and I'm just gonna show you. Okay. I believe that your generation will have seen the Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio, even though that is a pretty old version at the time as well. How many of you have seen that? And what is unusual about that version is that they made it modernized. Visually, it was modernized. But the script is 100% faithful to Old English that was used at the time when Shakespeare wrote the play. So that's what's interesting about that version with Leonardo DiCaprio. There is another version of it that was filmed in 2013. The Leonardo DiCaprio version was out in 1996. So it's pretty old. But it's by far it's not the oldest at all. It's far from being the oldest. But it was really popular when it came out. And Leonardo DiCaprio went on to do Titanic. Everyone has seen the Titanic. There was another version in 2013. I haven't watched that one. I've seen the Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio. But the first version of Romeo and Juliet on the big screen that I've watched was the one from 1968. And no, I didn't watch it at the movie theater because I wasn't even born then, but I watched it on video many, many years later. And it is, to me, it is my favorite. This was the first one that I watched. Later on, and I hope you're taking notes on this, because these references are cultural references from pop culture. We talked a little bit about pop culture when you watched one of the interviews that I did with a reality show celebrity. Reality shows are becoming part of pop culture. But way before that, we had a variety of different different aspects of culture that were incorporated. I'm trying to find something I want to show you. So Laurence Olivier, Sir Laurence Olivier, was I'm not going to say the very first, but he was one of the biggest names to play. He played Romeo. He played Romeo alongside Vivien Leigh. I know there are some cinema aficionados, at least one cinema aficionado in our class, who will probably know about all of this. Vivien Leigh was also in Gone with the Wind. And notice that all these pop culture references that I cite, they're all from English-speaking countries. They're English-speaking references. And if you come away from the English classes that you have this year knowing how English was basically broadcast all over the world and why, if you know why, that is probably a great start. English in the world. How did English spread itself all over the world? Please answer the question. Type in the chat box. When I do this with my fingers, I expect you to type, and I'm going to be looking at all of your answers, and I'll be responding in the chat box. And I take notes of everyone that participates. How did English become the lingua franca? How did English become the language that everyone uses? Why? Why did it? I need you to know the essence of this class really is knowing. Any of you who have written the colonization of countries all over the world by the British, any of you who has answered that has the correct answer, because that's how it starts. This year you will have the opportunity of hearing from real people that come from countries that have been colonized by Britain, one of them being Zimbabwe. I had the opportunity to interview a lady from Zimbabwe who later immigrated to England. But colonization was it. This is the main goal of this class, is for you to know that English is important, obviously, but also for you to know how it came to be what it is. And it is all about colonization. We will also have the opportunity to hear from people from other countries that speak English, not just because of the British Empire, but out of different circumstances. For instance, you will hear from someone from the Philippines. For those of you who don't know, the Philippines is a territory of the United States. So that country has English as their second language, not directly related to the British Empire, but somewhat, because the United States was colonized by the British. It's very important that you know that. And later on, throughout the semester, you will understand why I'm insisting on this. Without further ado, let's listen. English in the world. I hope that it's not too loud or too low, but I'm going to play. Let me see. If you have the right page, it says Q&A, English in the world, and this is what I'm going to play right now. Just a second, I'm just getting the details ready. It's a digital book. You all have licenses to access the digital books as well, so if it happens that one day, for some reason, if you don't have your physical book on there, you're able to access it on your computer.
Question and answer. English in the world. Hello. Welcome to the English Oracle, the weekly podcast where we try to answer some of your questions about the English language. My name's Jill.
And my name's Carl.
Have you had a good week, Carl?
Oh, mustn't grumble. Anyway, let's go to the first question. It's from Dieter in Germany, and he writes, I keep hearing that English is an important lingua franca, but what does that mean?
Well, Dieter, the term lingua franca is actually an old Italian word.
Yes, it doesn't really sound very English, does it?
And it means, literally, the language of the Franks.
Franks? Excuse me, but who were the Franks?
Oh, let's not get lost in ancient history, because what lingua franca means in practice is a language that's used for communication between people that don't have the same mother tongue.
So, in other words, if, for example, a Russian and a Japanese get stuck in a lift together, and neither speaks the other one's language,
which is quite likely,
then they'll probably have to find a lingua franca, a language they both have some familiarity with.
Which is most likely to be...
Latin.
No, English. Although, of course, Latin used to be lingua franca back in the Middle Ages.
But I thought you said we wouldn't get lost in ancient history. To sum up what you're saying, English is an important lingua franca today, and Latin is not. Next question.
Okay, this one's from Asif in Norway. Well, actually, it's two questions. Firstly, do we agree that the world would be a better place if there was only one language? And secondly, is English the most widely spoken language in the world? What's your opinion on only having one language, Carl?
Well, I see his point. I mean, just think of all the times when there are misunderstandings because of language. I think there have even been armed conflicts because of translation errors. But I can't help feeling the world would be a very boring place if we only had one language.
Oh, that's how I feel too. I mean, imagine going on holiday to Spain and not hearing Spanish. As far as I'm concerned, language is not just about communication, it's about identity as well.
How do you mean exactly?
Well, the way I see it, the language you learn as a child, literally your mother tongue, becomes part of who you are.
Yes, I agree up to a point, but if we all grew up with the same mother tongue, then we'd all express our identity in the same language, wouldn't we?
Yes, I suppose you're right. But like you said, it would be really boring.
What about Asif's other question? Is English the most widely spoken language in the world? What are your views on that?
Well, there's not much doubt about that, if you ask me. The answer is definitely yes.
Although that's really only when you include all the people who speak it as a second or a foreign language.
Yes, I agree, because if you're only counting native speakers, the most widely spoken language would be...
Mandarin Chinese.
Correct. In fact, it's people learning English who make all the difference.
I get your point. Which brings us to our next question. It's from Elza in Latvia. And she asks, are there more native speakers of English than people who learn the language at school?
A good question. And the answer is no. The number of native speakers of English is usually estimated to be around 380 million. That's most people in the UK, the US, Australia, New Zealand, Canada.
The Pitcairn Islands?
The where? I didn't quite get that.
The Pitcairn Islands. In the South Pacific. Population 50.
Okay, the Pitcairn Islands, I see. Now, the number of people learning English is thought to be about 1.5 billion. Now, that is a lot of people. Of course, it's difficult to say how many of these are actually at school. A lot of them will be teaching themselves. They'll be reading English language magazines and newspapers, listening to English language radio stations or podcasts, and so on, without a teacher. But we can be pretty sure that students learning English at school outnumber native speakers by at least 4 to 1.
Incredible. Makes you wonder what we've done to deserve it.
Indeed it does. And that brings us to our last question.
Which is from Anna in Guatemala. She wants to know why English is so popular everywhere.
Another good question. What do you think, Carl?
Oh, that's easy. Because it's such a wonderful language.
No, I don't think so, Carl. It's a little more complicated than that.
Of course you're right. I was only joking. Well, it is a wonderful language. But then I suppose you could say that about all languages. Could we say that it's an easy language to learn? I certainly found it easy.
Yes, but you're English, Carl. For people learning it as a foreign language, it's not easy at all. A huge vocabulary, complicated grammar, all those difficult sounds like TH and two sorts of S sounds.
The Leith Police dismisseth us.
Exactly. And we haven't even mentioned spelling. Laugh with GH, foreign with EI and a silent G, accommodation with 2 C's and 2 M's.
Not to mention diarrhea.
No, we won't mention that. Anyway, I think it's fair to say that English didn't catch on because it was easy.
So what is the reason then?
Well, we'll need to go back in history a bit.
Back to the Middle Ages again?
No, not quite that far, only to the 17th century. That's when Britain started building an empire, and that involved exporting their population to various parts of the globe. By the end of the 19th century, there were English speakers settled in North America, in Australia, New Zealand,
The Pitcairn Islands?
the Pitcairn Islands, and even in places where they didn't settle much, they started running the show and teaching the native populations to speak English. They did that in India and many parts of Africa.
OK, but how come they're still speaking English? I mean, after all, it's a while since the British packed up and left.
True, but no sooner had the British Empire gone than a new superpower emerged.
Oh, I see. You're talking about the USA. So what you're saying is that the USA took over from the British Empire.
That's right. And what do the USA and Britain have in common?
An interest in the royal family?
Yes, that too. But first and foremost, the English language. So the need to learn English just grew and grew. And of course, since then, we've had the digital revolution and the internet, which was pioneered by the US and therefore dominated by the English language. Did you know it's estimated that more than 50% of content on the net is in English? That's quite a percentage when you consider that only 5% have it as a mother tongue. It almost seems a bit unfair.
That's not how I see it. It just reflects how the world is. English is the dominant language and probably always will be.
I disagree, actually. I mean, I bet they said the same thing about Latin. Nothing lasts forever, though, and figures show that content in other languages is growing. So maybe the time has come to start learning Chinese.
Oh no, far too difficult. But that brings us up to the present day and the end of this podcast.
Yes, time flies when you're being an oracle. I hope Dieter, Asif, Elsa and Anna were happy with the answers they got.
And that the rest of our listeners got something out of it too. Can we sum up by saying that we hope to keep this podcast going for a long time. But to do so, we need you to send more questions to our Twitter account. That's all for now. Until next week. Bye.
All right, so the page here says that you should listen to it twice, but for the interest of what we're doing today, I'm not going to ask you to do that. It was a lot longer than I remembered it from teaching it last time. So all I need you to do right now is type quickly 3 facts that you remember from what you just listened to. Just 3 things, and I'll be responding in the chat box. Just take 20-30 seconds just to type 3 facts that you remember from what you listened. If you couldn't hear properly, or for some reason you didn't have the opportunity to hear, if the sound was bad, anything, you can talk to the IT person at the school and get them to help you log in to your license to the digital book so you can listen to it on your own at a later time, because everybody has access to the digital books. And the digital books have all the listening files. This lingua franca situation and the British as a superpower, the United States as a superpower, these facts will be very useful for you in the future, especially if you get pulled out to do the exam. These are always very popular topics for the exam, so keep your antennas out for anything that has to do with these topics. So I would like you to, if everybody has their books, the background information for the history of the English language, Shakespeare in the English language. This is reading for further studies that we'll be doing this year. But today, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to give your own opinion about these topics. Number 1, I want you to write, and it doesn't need to be an essay with 3 or 5 paragraphs, nothing like that. You're going to write perhaps 1 paragraph with a good solid 10 to 12 sentences about how English is relevant to you personally. In previous years, I've had different students talk about how they play video games or computer games and they communicate with people from all over the world. And then, if that's the case with you, it is not enough to just say, English is important because I play video games. The end. No, I want you to go into the topic and give me more information. I play this game and this game, and then you talk about the game a little bit. And then you talk about your experiences with the English in the game. What kind of vocabulary do they use in the game? And how it has transferred to other areas of your life. People who are, for example, interested in watching movies. If you're a cinema aficionado and you love watching movies, talk about the favorite movies that you've watched and if they were in English. What kind of English was it that you were exposed to in those movies? Which one do you prefer? British English, Australian English, Kiwi English, Scottish? And so that because people often say, hey, I don't know what to write about, so I'm giving you ideas. If you like music and the lyrics of the songs that you listen to are mostly in English, talk about a song that you have listened to or that you enjoy and how you relate to the lyrics being in English. There is a lot that you can say on this topic. So before you take a break, here is what we're going to do. We're going to do 2 rounds of Quizlet live. So I'm going to give you some time to get your phones, or maybe you want to do Quizlet live on your computers. But remember, this paragraph has to be handed in today. After we finish Quizlet live, the 3 rounds that we're going to do of Quizlet live, you take a break, then you take some time, write your paragraph, and then you are dismissed for the day, at least with English. There is a description of this activity on Canvas for you. You can hand it in either via Canvas inbox or where it says Uppgaver on there. I'm going to be playing a sample game in the background, so don't worry about the sample game. Just do your game that you see on your phone. The sample game in the background is just to illustrate what we're doing. Just start the game as soon as you see the code in chat. The study set we'll be doing will have vocabulary that you should know by now. The translations will be from English into Norwegian.